In Iraq, the US is arming Sunnis who've promised to help fight al-Qaeda. Are there dangers in giving guns to groups that might not always be on your side? It's what some say happened in Afghanistan with al-Qaeda. This is Inside Story. Hello, I'm David Foster. The so-called surge of US troops in Iraq is now in its 5th month. It's bringing only modest results, and the Bush administration is now using other strategies. One such strategy is arming Sunni tribes in Iraq with the promise that they'll fight al-Qaeda groups. Speaking on Thursday at a Naval War College in the state of Rhode Island, the US President George Bush pointed to the use of this plan in Anbar province as a success.
These operations are showing good results. Our forces are going into parts of Anbar where they couldn't operate before. With the help of Iraqi and coalition forces, local Sunni tribes have driven al-Qaeda from most of Ramadi. Attacks there are now down to a 2-year low.
But there are signs that the plan's leading to conflict. Tribal leaders from US-allied Sunni groups were meeting at Baghdad's heavily fortified Mansour Hotel on Monday when a suicide bomber struck, killing 13 people and injuring dozens of others. Among the dead, several tribal leaders. A day later, an al-Qaeda-linked group claimed responsibility for the attack. Some Sunni tribesmen blamed the attack on Iraqi Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki's government. Well, Mr. Maliki governs an Iraqi population of around 27 million people. Along religious lines, the majority of the country follows Shia Islam. Though in the minority, followers of Sunni Islam dominate large parts of the country, particularly the northern and central sections. Anbar province, a large province which borders Jordan, Syria and Saudi Arabia, is overwhelmingly Sunni. Its population is just over 1 million. Well, it's Anbar province that's the testing ground, as Mr. Bush said, for a new American strategy aimed to help stem the violence in Iraq. US officials are now said to be supplying money, fuel and arms to Sunni groups in Iraq. And according to the US, these groups have agreed to fight their former allies, al-Qaeda, and stop attacks on US troops. It's a strategy that Washington hopes will stabilize the country and allow American troops eventually to leave. According to the US military, attacks in Anbar province have fallen by 60% in the last year, and that's leading the US to arm more Sunni groups. It's currently negotiating with tribes in other provinces. Joining us now, our guests in London, Ghassan Attia, Director of the Iraqi Institute for Development and Democracy. In Washington, Dr. Harlan Ullman, a senior advisor at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. And with us in Doha, Captain Victor Beck, the US Central Command spokesman. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us on Inside Story. Captain Beck, if I could come to you first of all, you've said you're giving these groups help. Does that involve giving them guns and ammunition?
You know, it's very interesting the way you categorized it initially, and I listened to the things the president and the things that he said, and in no way did the president say we're giving tribal leaders guns. I think that I did hear a report that we've given 10 AK-47s, but that is almost nothing compared to the help and the cooperation that we want to be able to give them to ensure that al-Qaeda is ridded out of Anbar province.
But surely, Captain Beck, you're a spokesman for Central Command. Central Command must know what number of guns and ammunition and body armor and all sorts of other supplies have been given to these people. You must know whether it's 10 AK-47s or a whole host of other things.
Well, like I said, I don't believe that I've heard a report about 10 AK-47s. I'm not aware of a variety of other things. I do know that the Sunni tribal tribes are tired of al-Qaeda being held hostage in their own local communities. And so we are going to continue to work closely with them and with a variety of tribes and tribal leaders and side by side with the Iraqi security force to rid Iraq of al-Qaeda.
Are you prepared to stand side by side with them, those people that maybe just a couple of months ago were standing on the other side of the wall and firing at you, trying to kill you?
We are prepared to work closely with anybody who is interested in ridding Iraq of al-Qaeda and extremism.
Dr. Ullman, in Washington, from what you've heard, are large supplies of arms being given to these groups?
No, but you have to realize this is not a new tactic or a strategy. It goes back to November 2003 when the Marines were given the responsibility for Anbar province, and they've been trying to recruit Sunni groups for quite a long time, and I think there's a lot of sense to that. The fundamental problem, David, that you have to realize is that, to use a medical analogy, Iraq is like a person who is inflicted with various forms of cancer, diabetes, and other terribly debilitating diseases, and one medication that can deal with cancer or one medication that can deal with diabetes is going to cause all sorts of problems with the other. What you see in Iraq is something that is akin, I believe, a civil war overlaid on an insurgency in which al-Qaeda is but a single part. And so this is extremely complex, it's extremely difficult, and the profound predicament the military, the American military, has is that it has to use tools that go beyond its scope. There are other instruments of policy, economic instruments, social instruments, political instruments, and that's what makes this so very, very terribly difficult. A very, very gloomy footnote, I should say, the House Armed Services Committee just issued a unanimous study that argues that the Iraqi security forces are not up to scratch, and it will be some time before that can happen. And so the strategy of clearing and holding to turn this over to the Iraqi forces, it seems to me, is made much more difficult if that House of Representatives report is indeed accurate, as I think it is.
Whatever they're saying, they are doing deals with these groups in some form of
Sure.
some form or another, on the basis that my enemy's enemy is my friend. And in the end, deals nearly always
Correct.
backfire.
They can. The problem here is that you don't want to create independent Sunnis who then are going to turn against the Shia-led majority, and so you've got to be very, very, very careful. One of the problems, quite frankly, we're facing with the surge is that I believe we needed more people so that you could do this not just in Anbar province in Baghdad, but other parts of the country together. And the fundamental problem that we face is that unless there is political reconciliation in Baghdad among the Sunnis, Kurds, and the Shia, then all these efforts are largely going to be for naught, because ultimately you're going to have Sunnis against Shia, Shia against Shia, Kurds against Arabs, and the situation, which cannot be resolved militarily, as Admiral Fallon, the commander of Central Command, and General Petraeus, the ground commander, have often said, because this requires a political solution, that's where the effort must be. So sure, in a military sense, trying to use the tribes for a productive way is very, very sensible, but unless there's an overarching strategic and political framework that leads towards reconciliation among the warring political factions, it becomes very difficult for the military to be able to resolve those larger issues.
Hassan Attia in London, I read somewhere that you said you can rent loyalties, but you can't buy them outright. Is that what's happening here?
Judging from Iraq history, and I am a student of Iraq, during the British occupation of Iraq during the First World War, exactly the same episode happened. The British tried to win some of the tribes, but these tribes, as long as you pay them and you seem to be on the winning side, they will be with you. Once you are on the losing side or you cease paying them, they will leave you. That's a fact the British realized and paid heavy price for it. More than 13,000 killed and injured in that case. Now with the American, what we see today is actually a reflection of the confused, the incoherent American policy. They came to Iraq to establish democracy, civil society, a modern society. Now they are actually entrenching and empowering the tribal system in Iraq. They came with the idea that they came dissolving the army. Then they realized they need an army. They already spent $19 billion on training the army and police. Still, they consider this army is not up to standard, and they need to resort to the help of the tribal people. They started with the premise, a very simplistic approach, that if there are Sunni, Shia, Kurd, we have 80% of them, namely the Shia 60%, the Kurd 20%. So they can do away with the 20%, forgetting the fact that the Kurds were 20% and they were able to destabilize Iraq for 80 years.
But
the Kurds have no friends other than the mountain.
What kind of signal will this send to somebody like Muqtada al-Sadr, the Shia leader and his Mehdi army, when the government and the US have been asking this particular group to disarm for months? What's a Shia group like that going to think about the fact that Sunnis are being armed?
Exactly. This is good point, because the Americans are pushing Maliki to disarm the militia. On the other hand, they are creating Sunni militia, and this will give a pretext to the Sadr and those who behind him to refuse being disarmed. And in this sense, the Americans are wavering, fluctuating. Once they appear as they are supporting the Shia, now they appear as if they're supporting the Sunni without a coherent plan. What is missing in all this is the blueprint for a coherent plan. Here, if I may add, what I was advocating, and I still advocate now, is basically you have to reach Iraq from a political point of view. Basically, the Americans thought democracy will be there. They thought victory will be there. Now they should know what is their priority. If their priority is to get rid of the Qaeda and the terrorists, that's fine. Then there is an interest for the Sunni, moderate Shia, the Kurd, to fight al-Qaeda. But for this group to fight al-Qaeda, they should have common understanding how to live with each other. And the American then should play the honest broker among these factions. In addition, the American forfeited, or rather weakened, its policy, the middle grounder, the secular in Iraq, by emphasizing the ethnic and sectarian nature of Iraq.
Let me go to Captain Beck and ask you to go back a little bit in time. And was it not by arming groups, Mujahideen fighters in Afghanistan, that al-Qaeda was born, that so many enemies were made in that country?
Well, I want to actually go back to a little bit and not actually discuss that particularly, but I want to tell you that there is a blueprint, and the blueprint is to rid Iraq of al-Qaeda and extremists. You know, I recently read a report that 88% of Iraqis believe they're Iraqis first, and then they're Sunnis and Shias. I mean, in order for there to be a safe and stable Iraq from a military standpoint, I mean, those are the things that we're focused on to ensure that there's a safe and stable Iraq. So Sunnis and Shias and Kurds and every Iraqi has a place to flourish in their own government.
I'm sure, but I do think the question that I put to you is linked to that as well. Was it not by arming groups in Afghanistan, doing to some extent what you're doing now in Iraq, that al-Qaeda itself was born? Is there not a great danger in this? One headline writer in London said it's putting out a fire with gasoline.
But the reality is this, is that if in fact a tribal leader is tired of fighting al-Qaeda in their backyard, and they want and they see the value of working to rid them, and they're tired of the death and destruction in their own yard, they can't have a safe and stable neighborhood, then they are in fact could be working with.
But it's not as simple as that, because the moment that they
Correct,
get rid
it's
of those,
not as simple as
the
that.
moment they get rid
Absolutely
of those people with your help, they're going to look back and see who they consider to be the real enemy, and that might be you, and you will have given them guns.
Without question, you and I, neither of us, none of us can predict what the future is. It's not just so simple as, okay, you're our friend today and you were our enemy yesterday. As we've said a couple of different times already, it's very, very complex. And so in many ways to assess how that works, that's where we may come to a conclusion that it does make sense that they are going to work with us, and they are going to work independently with or without us to rid their backyards of al-Qaeda.
Dr. Harlan Ullman in Washington, it was you, I believe, who coined the phrase shock and awe. What we're seeing here is a very different tactic. It's been tried in the past. Has it ever worked?
The answer is, of course, it's worked in different places, but look, there's a larger issue here, and that is simply, I think one of the problems with the American strategy is that it is focused too much on al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda is a problem, it is not the problem. What you have in Iraq is, I would argue, a civil war, and you have profound political differences between Sunnis, Shias, and Kurds that have been made much, much more difficult, and no doubt al-Qaeda has played a role here. And so unless you attack the larger problem, even if we cleaned out al-Qaeda tomorrow, if they were to leave, That's not going to settle the role of the Shia militias, the Shia differences, and the Sunni and Sunni Shia differences. And so the problem, I think, here is that our priorities are misplaced. Yes, we have to deal with al-Qaeda, and you can understand why the Americans would want to focus on that. But unless we can deal with the larger political issues, we'll be at this for a terribly long time, because in the process, more and more Iraqis are going to become embittered, more and more Iraqis who do not have jobs, and roughly 60% of Iraq is either unemployed or underemployed. They've got to make some money someplace. That's one of the reasons why you have all these roadside bombs.
I'd quite like to bring this back to this one particular tactic that the US military is employing at the moment. And I'm wondering whether, if al-Qaeda is defeated in Anbar province and they move up to another part of Iraq and drive them out of there, will they have defeated them, or will they have just driven them somewhere else?
Well, I think there are two things here. First, al-Qaeda will just slip away. It's like quicksilver, and they will come back in some other form. But what we are ignoring here is that there are two revolutions going on, one in the Arab world and one in the Islamic world. They both pit old against new. In the Islamic world, you have those who want to take Islam back to the 7th century. In the Arab world, you have people who are part of the new who want access to power in places like Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, Egypt, and elsewhere. And what we have to realize is that these revolutions could have the power of the French Revolution in 1789. Unless we understand that, then you're putting al-Qaeda in the wrong context. And so al-Qaeda is very much a manifestation of these revolutions, and that's what's going to spread. And you see it spreading right now to Thailand, you see it spreading to parts of Pakistan. And so unfortunately, even if we can defeat al-Qaeda, say in Anbar, because al-Qaeda has become such a broad movement that's based very much on desperation, on humiliation, on the fact that many Arabs and Muslims have no other place to go. Unless we attack those causes, which include the Arab-Israeli-Palestinian conflict, we're going to be going at this for a very, very long time. And my guess is that these revolutions are going to get worse, not better.
I'm going to bring in Dr. Ghassan Attia in just a moment. But as our sole Iraqi, I'd like to read out this statement to him and to our other guests from the Iraqi Prime Minister, the government's reaction to US arming of Sunni groups. Mr. al-Maliki said last week that he thought the US tactic was, quote, dangerous because this will create new militias. And he went on, I believe that the coalition forces do not know the backgrounds of the tribes. It's a job of the government. A little bit later on, he did change his mind, saying he does back the US plan. Mr. Attia, as an Iraqi, do you believe it should be the responsibility of the Iraqi government rather than the United States to arm these groups to get them on side? And is it not saying something about the state of readiness of the Iraqi police and National Army that the US has decided to do this on its own?
The fact that the Americans went on their own, this is testimony that the government cannot deliver. The American administration put certain benchmark to this government. They failed to achieve any one of them. And the most important of them is national reconciliation. The government, this particular government, especially now there is a new agreement between al-Da'wa party, which is al-Maliki party, and Skiri. Actually, this is a new alliance against al-Sadr and others. The government itself, al-Maliki in particular, he is part of the problem. He's not part of the solution. He cannot play the role of a judge and jury in national reconciliation. If we really, the American, would like to achieve national reconciliation, then to bring the Iraqi together, this step cannot be achieved because we Iraqi are so divided now, so polarized, that we need, first of all, regional reconciliation. Regional reconciliation, they will be able then, the Iranian, the Saudi, the Turk, the Jordanian, they can help us Iraqis and those who are get their support from them to bring them together to the table. This cannot be achieved because the neighboring countries, they have no quarrel with us Iraqis. Their problem is with the American. And they feel that the Americans are in Baghdad as a stepping stone to threaten them, whether in Riyadh, whether in Ankara, or whether in Tehran. So in this sense, things are so interrelated. To reach national reconciliation, you have to think first how to bring the region into a package where they agree on new regional system in the area. The stumbling block to achieve this is the American. If the American will not try to approach the region as a whole and to sit with the Iranian, not alone, but Iranian and Saudi, the Jordanian, as well as the Turk and others, then they could come with a new order.
I do understand that it's almost impossible to talk about one particular area of Iraq without straying into the bigger picture.
No.
But if we can, I'd like to stay on what we've been talking about tonight, getting particular tribes, Sunni tribes on side, perhaps giving them arms. Captain Beck from US Central Command, a lot of criticism that you won't be able to control the weaponry once it goes to these groups, that it could eventually be turned on you or indeed on Shia enemy of these particular Sunnis. How do you control it?
Well, I want to go back to a couple of comments.
I'd like you to answer that question if you could.
I will do the very best I can. But we are concerned about the al-Qaeda network, not just in Iraq but elsewhere too. And so the way you control, to answer your specific question, we are working very closely to ensure that before you just work with somebody and say the communication between the two, there's a level of trust that gets built. But it sounds so trite the way I say, and I apologize for that because it's not trite. It's very difficult and it's very, very complex. I can't predict the future, and neither can any of us here on this program tonight as to what's going to happen 3, 4, 5, 6 months from now. We're working very hard, working closely with our coalition partners and with the Iraqi security force and the Iraqi government to ensure a safe and stable Iraq. And this is a difficult time, and these measures are very hard and complex to come by, but that's what we're trying to do.
Okay, Captain Beck, thank you very much indeed. Harlan Ullman in the United States, just a thought from you on the eventual outcome in Iraq, because this is just one part of a much bigger plan. If al-Qaeda is defeated in Iraq, what happens then?
Al-Qaeda will not be defeated in that sense. It will move elsewhere. You asked earlier for an example where this worked. Ironically, this sort of strategy of trying to get tribes and local allies worked in Vietnam, oddly enough, in which the United States and the South Vietnamese were really able to defeat the Viet Cong. But what happened? What happened was the North Vietnamese ultimately assembled an army and conquered Vietnam, the South. My concern is that what's going to happen is that because I think the surge is not manned sufficiently, and because in the United States there is going to be a huge backlash. A very, very senior Senator Dick Lugar in the Foreign Relations Committee just the other day announced his disenchantment with the policy, and I suspect there are going to be more Republican defections. So I think at home what you're going to see is a growing demand for some kind of a redeployment staged over time. My concern is what we're going to see in Iraq is going to be continued violence for a very, very long time, and unless we can join some sort of a regional agreement to limit damage, because I'm afraid that the problems in Iraq could spill over.
We're running out of time.
Problems, and I would predict things are going to get worse before they get better.
All right, thank you very much indeed, Dr. Ullman. Hassan Atiyah, the one Iraqi we have on the program tonight. When you look at policies like this, when you hear the comments from our guests, how much hope do you have for the future of your country?
Well, though it is dim and dark, but still there is a silver lining. But it needs a courageous attitude and an ability to review their policies as far as the American administration is there. The Qaeda was not in Iraq when the American invaded it. That when the American have to consider that they created the problem and they want to solve it. They cannot solve it single-handedly. They have to change their policies. And I agree. If the way they are continuing, they think the search will give them a better situation to deal with the neighbors and others after 3 or 4 months.
All right, gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. I'm going to leave our viewers with this thought from a Kurdish legislator warning in the Washington Post. They, the Sunnis, take arms, they take money, and in the future they will be a problem. Politically, they are still against the Americans and against the Iraqi government. Thanks for watching Inside Story.